morning and welcome to Weekday. I'm Ted O'Brien, and many times in the past you've seen us talking about and with authors. But today, a most unusual situation because the book is called Street Corner Society, and it was written almost 40 years ago. That's right, it was a sociologist's monograph or study of well, it says Italian slum there. It turned out it was what we know today as the North End. And today, in addition to meeting the author and talking about the book, we're going to talk about a couple of the boys, and with a couple of the boys that he wrote about 40 years ago, who are now, of course, no longer boys. Professor, why did you pick the North End for a socio-economic study of an Italian slum?
Well, I grew up around New York City, and somehow my picture of a slum district involved large flats, number of stories, and I looked over South Boston and East Boston and so on, and it didn't somehow fit the picture I had. And then I discovered as I walked the streets of the North End that this indeed was the most congested section of the city, and it had the characteristics that sociologists were then interested in. About one out of every 10 or 12 flats had a bathtub, no very little central heating, a poor district, most people unemployed and hanging on the corner. And somehow that attracted me, as it was so different from my own background. I'm the son of a college professor. I'd never seen anything like this. It was sort of an adventure for me.
So as in a sense, as the academic community, as the people out of America were looking at this area and calling it a slum, that's something that's going to make a lot of people angry even to hear that word, Professor Foote. Did it at the time?
Yeah, people didn't like to think of it that way. I remember talking with fellows on the corner about what a slum was, and they would identify someplace in New York City, but not the North End.
Always somewhere else.
Yeah.
In a moment, we'll meet a couple of the guys you talked with on that corner over 40 years ago, and we'll also go into the nuts and bolts of the book and find out what Professor Foote learned and, by extension, has taught generations of us about street corner society right after this break. Welcome back to Weekday. We're talking with Professor William Foote Whyte, the author of this book, Street Corner Society. But more than that, we'd like to have you meet a couple of the corner boys about whom he wrote 40 years ago. Would you welcome Ralph Orlandelo and Al Natale? Hi, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Corner boys grow up to be men. I mean, that's the first thing that we realize about this situation. But to go back a bit, Professor Whyte, wasn't there a little bit, when I approached the book, I approached it from the point of view that there was something a little bloodless and detached about the idea of going into a community with some preconceived notions to find out what the folks were like. What was the big thing that came out of the study? What was the real surprising fact that you learned?
Well, I think almost everything was surprising because I was so naive about the nature of the area, but as I looked at the sociological literature later, they depicted a district like the North End as disorganized. People didn't stick together, no real standards of behavior and so on, and I was finding it completely different. Very, very cohesive groups on the corner, strong family ties, that sort of thing. Sure, people were poor, but that wasn't surprising. I knew that.
There were hierarchies, there were morals, there was a code of ethics, all the things that the outside society looking at the North End said, not possible to exist.
Yeah, it was a problem that the district was pretty well organized within itself, but not well integrated with the political economy of the city and the region.
Okay, Ralph, you were Professor Whyte's first research assistant. Did you know you were a research assistant at the time?
No, I did not. As a matter of fact, not only was I his first research assistant, which I'm very proud of, but he actually changed my life. He had a profound influence over my life for 40 years. I had a severe degree of inferiority complex before I met Bill.
You were a high school dropout. You were hanging on the corner. In the book, your name is Sam Franco. There are others, businessmen, politicians now, real estate operators who were all corner kids. No job, what, no future?
It was during the Great Depression, and things were very, very bleak. I can remember hanging on the corner, say during the wintertime, in one of the doorways. First there'd be a 1 foot and then on the other because it was so cold. But you're just hanging there, wasting time, wasting human precious time, just hanging around, doing nothing.
Al, what was your life like in the North End during these years?
Well, I was hanging around the corner of Sheep and Salem Street, and we had a big group down there. And later on, we got involved in ball clubs and things like that. When I was younger, there was hardly any place where we could play. We had our backyard, or either go up the roof or go up in fire escapes or something to that effect. I used to hide down cellars and play games and all that there.
What did you do to the barrels before you got into them?
Well, when you went down the cellar, you had to either shake, make a big noise or smack a wall, or if there was a cover, take the cover and bang it against the pail so the rats would run out. Then you're okay.
What are we talking about? Let's set the physical scene for you. Earlier this week, Weekday went with Ralph Orlandelo back to the North End, and he conducted a walking tour of the locale of street corner society. And here he is now. Ralph, take a look at yourself.
This is a building that William Foote Whyte first lived when he was single, when he started his study, Street Corner Society. It was at 7 Parmenter Street, and subsequently, when he met Kathleen King, he moved all the way down to Hanover Street to 477, and this is where he remained for the remainder of his study while he was in the North End. Well, how I met Bill Whyte was they started a recreation center down the street on North Margin Street in Thatcher, right across from the Pizzeria Regina. And at that time, when I saw this place, it said Recreation Center. It was new to me, so I took my gang down there. And Doc Ernest Petchew, in the book as Doc, was the recreation leader. And he spotted me, as Bill Whyte mentions in the book, that as the leader of my gang. And next thing you know, I was introduced to Bill, and that's when I showed him some of the things that I was doing, like recording the background of the guys in my gang, drew a sketch, a drawing of each one of them, their ambition, and things like that. But I had no idea why I was doing it, but I recorded all this background information on my guys. And this is how Bill got to know me through Doc, because Doc knew I was doing this. Ernest Petchew knew I was doing this. I was born at 92 North Margin Street in 1919, just across the way there on the stoop. And this area is called, in fact, we called ourselves the Endicott Street. Our corner guys, the gang was called the Endicott Street Gang, although it was a combination of some of the boys from North Margin, where I live, right here, and Endicott Street at this intersection. As a matter of fact, the Bill Whyte's book, the cover, was taken right here at the corner. Some of the guys you can see in the photograph were playing cards, and when we had dice games, that was a card game, but when we had dice games, we'd be right in this alley. And this is about it as far as what we did here. We'd play ball here. There was a lot of activity. Around the corner is the Charlestown Bridge, and this separated the Irish from the Italians. And of course, in those days, when we had conflicts, it was on the Charlestown Bridge. Way back about 40 years ago, this site was called the gas house because it did indeed have a large structure, metal structure, which contained gas. When that was knocked down, it left a lot of debris here. And we found an opportunity to make a place where we could play ball, so we cleaned it up. And this led to really my first protest, a protest march to the local police station, where we told the cops that, gee, we had spent weeks cleaning this place up, and it was off the streets, and it was a safe place to play ball. And anyway, that was my start of I guess, formally leading a group in protest to improve conditions in the North End. And I might also point out that in back of me is the grill work that covers where the Brinks robbery was held. In the book, The Brinks Robbery, the author points out that it was not known that the Brinks Company was maintaining millions in the site. But I should say that when we used to hit our home plate was at that end, and when we hit the ball and when there was a foul tip, it would go behind us and attack and get stuck into the grill work. So the kids, we always had somebody to retrieve ball for us, and the kids would scatter up to the grill work, and you could see the Brinks people counting money. So it's just the opposite of what the author of the Brinks robbery said. We, in fact, I can tell you this, the kids in my gang knew they were counting money up there. When Bill Whyte came into the picture and I got involved with the social structure of the North End, one of the things we did was when the police said the police told us we could not play in it because we would hit, our balls would go over the wall and into the homes, the tenant homes across the way. I'll never forget that one day was a Sunday where people were having their normal Italian spaghetti meal, and the ball went right into the house and smashed the plates and spaghetti. And of course, we knew that was bad because we wouldn't want that to happen to us. In making a long story short, we were able through the process of identifying the structure in the North End, the final results were that we were able to get the brick wall you see there and the fence, and we were able to organize, and I was able to organize a 16-ball softball, a 16-ball club softball league. The North End Park, what you see in front of you, holds probably some of my fondest memories when I was a teenager. This is where we played ball. This is, in fact, where we had the first night football game. It was the first time the city of Boston, anybody played under lights, and we had to rent the lights in order to do this, and it was something I will never forget. We also played baseball here during the daytime, and it's just about the way you see it, except that down behind me there was a long pier, and across the way you can see the old Ironsides and Bunker Hill, which brings me to the Michelangelo School, where I was a student just up the hill here. And from sitting in the classroom, I would sometimes kind of goof off from what I was supposed to be doing and gaze towards old Ironsides and the battleships and Bunker Hill's monument, and I knew there was something else to life besides beyond the North End. Bill Whyte completely changed my life. I was just hanging around the corner looking for something to do, like most of the guys in most corners in most urban cities, especially in the congested areas such as the North End. And I saw the other side. When I met Bill, he was interested in what I was doing, and the next thing you knew, I knew what the word sociology meant. And I became so interested in it because of the fact that he said to me, he said, "You know, Ralph," he says, "I don't know what we can do here." He's talking about his study, "but I hope that some way the results will help the district." And this was something that I had been fighting for all my life. I had started with a newsletter, some magazine type thing about cleaning the streets, giving us a boys' community center, improving the North End Park, and that kind of thing. And of course, this was very compatible with what Bill told me that he was doing in the North End. He just says, "I'm not going to promise you anything, Ralph, but one thing led to another." This is how we got involved in the protest march to City Hall and a number of things that happened in the study relative to improving our welfare here in the North End. The reason that Bill Whyte did not identify the characters in the book by their real names is that he did not want to hurt anybody. He felt there were too many intimate details in his study that could offend or embarrass some of the people. He didn't think, and I don't think he embarrassed anybody. I think it was a credit to the North End for him to come down here and tell us, and tell other sociologists for the first time that the North End was not disorganized, that it had a social system, and that it was something that when you think of how we had to cope with adversity, with so many things holding us back, that I'm proud to have been a part of the scene, and I'm sure that anybody that reads the book will feel the same way.
Okay, Ralph Orlandelo. Let's get to some of those problems. Let's get to some of the statistics of adversity. 25,000 people were there when you were there?
There was about approximately 25,000, and 95% of the 25,000 were Italian Americans. However, as a direct result of gentrification, that's been reduced to around 12,000, and less than 60% are now Italian Americans. And we're talking about 35 acres, around 619 people during my days to the acre. Mm-hmm. I'm sure some of you people have 35 acres in here with one person on it.
At your time, wasn't the Bennett Street Industrial School in being, and you also had a caddy camp to which the youngsters did go up to New Hampshire?
I never went
Neither
to caddy
of you
camp.
attended?
I
did?
I used to go from caddy camp. I used to go from Maplewood, New Hampshire, Bethlehem, New Hampshire. Mr. Fangine was the leader of the club then, that's right.
So my husband's name is Campana.
Oh, I know him very
well.
good.
Yeah,
very well.
He's a real fine guy.
Incidentally, Kay, during the break you said that you were very hostile toward that term slum.
Yes, I was. I resent that because to me the North End has a flavor all of its own, not just the food, but the people are warm, loving, they are outgoing, the housing is somewhat congested, but it's expensive living there.
Could I react to that as one of the guys that was born and raised there? Actually, Bill is not knocking it. He's, like I say, I'm proud of living in the North End, and I'm proud of what Bill did because he told us for the first time, this is how I get out of my inferiority complex. All I know about is, we were inferior, Dago, you can go all the way to the Sacco and Vanzetti case to, we're talking about an impoverished district. And yet, we were a disorganized, dangerous, sinister area. Bill comes on the scene, and I find out we're organized, that we had a social commitment, that we had the viable, livable and interactions between ourselves and so forth.
What principles were you able to abstract from street corner society that apply to any subgroup, Professor Whyte? I don't want to get too esoteric here, but isn't everything that I hear you saying, Ralph, that could be applied to any extremely poor area, couldn't it?
I think I was particularly interested in the informal group structures because you approach a group of fellows like Ralph's on the corner. If you ask them straight out, who's your leader, they'll all deny that there's a leader. No, we're all equal. But if you look at the way the actions get organized, it's easy to spot somebody like Ralph or Doc Ernest Pecci, and you could see that life was structured, and you had to understand the structure of the group. I think it's very important that outsiders tend to try to approach the individual and be unaware of the group structure. If you don't deal with the structure, you can't relate to people effectively.
In other words, there was some organizational analysis going on here to find out what moved the particular group. We'll be back to ask for specific examples of that and take more questions and comments from our audience right after this. Welcome back to Weekday. We're looking back 40 years from the time that Street Corner Society was written, the story of the North End, and some of the groups that interacted there. And Marion, you had a comment to make.
Yes, I have. I would like to take exception to the word slum in describing the North End because these gentlemen have been subjective. I can be too. In that period of 40 years ago, I went to the North End every Sunday to St. Stephen's as a part of John Kiley's quartet. And I saw the Street Corner Society all dressed up. They were playing Mora as I went down Hanover Street, and all the granddads were on the plaza, and all the mothers and grandmothers were in the church. And I discovered, because I did visit homes in the North End, that front, that sort of broken down door, very often reveals a beautiful home at the top of the stairs. Neat, clean, orderly. So my memory of the North End is a very beautiful one, and I don't have any marriage links or blood links. Okay.
I don't think we're coming across then. Yes, I agree with you, and I don't know if I'm speaking for... We agree 100%. But you see, we were congested. Yeah, we couldn't take a bath. For example, we had a bathhouse. Men and women shared the same bathhouse. The beach. You know, there was a wall that separated boys from the girls. Did you ever go down a cellar? Did you ever play on the roofs? You see, these are things we're trying to point out, that the total picture is a little different than walking into Capitalupo's bakery shop when you're going for an Irish woman would come down Endicott Street, nice on a Sunday, go into the baker shop, hot bread, go to St. Mary's Church, that kind of thing. Beautiful. And it was very safe. I never remember a single robbery in the North End. I never remember a grocery store being broken in. My sister or any sister could walk down the street perfectly safe. Night, daytime, anytime. Not a robbery. And I'm 63 years old. I don't remember robbery. Well, I was only 24 when I left there.
Okay, fair enough. But let's say that the term slum was imposed from the outside, wasn't it?
Right.
That's the point.
It was called a lower class.
It was looked upon by sociologists as the classic example of a slum district. So my purpose was to penetrate beneath the stereotype and see what life was like there.
And what was it like, in brief? Then we'll hear from Ralph.
Well, I never felt finally so much at home in my life. That is, it took a while to get to fit in, but I was fortunate in being able to move in with an Italian family, the Orlandis, and the Capri restaurant, and I had Italian cooking for the first time in my life. I got to love it. I thrived on it.
How long were you there?
Well, the total study was about 3.5 years. I lived with the Italian family for about 18 months, and then I got married, and we moved down to our own flat at the end of Hanover Street in a Sicilian district. That's interesting, perhaps, to you, because, Ralph, your people were from around Naples, and yours also, Al, and they looked down upon the Sicilians. We were warned that, Sicilians are very tough people, don't go down there. We found one
so
of those
it wasn't all
stereotypes.
one thing there in the North End.
Well, what Bill is saying, that it all depended on what town. For example, my parents came from Santo Sorso della Baronia. So you would find that those people that would live in what they call Avellino would tend to cluster. Sicilians tended to cluster. Genoese people tended to cluster. So we had Little Italy's in one big Little Italy. You see?
And all of you were regarded by outsiders as the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
And they felt discriminated against heavily at the time.
And they were.
Yeah.
Yes, Carol, you had a question, or...
Just interested to know, the book is coming out now, and I presume that's what's happening. And
being reissued again.
Reissued after 40 years, and what was the interest there? And the other thing I wanted to know was what Ralph did when he left, and that he said his life had changed so much.
Okay.
And the other gentleman, too.
First of all, the book now in its third edition. Why is the interest again here?
Well, it was published first without the appendix in which I described my experiences, the way I did the study. When I was teaching sociology later, I found that it was impossible to get any reading material that told students what it was like to be a participant observer, the method I was using. So I wrote this, and that seemed to revive interest in the book. That was the second edition. The third edition came out after my retirement event at Cornell. The college invited back 7 research assistants who'd served with me over the years, starting with Ralph. And Ralph made such an eloquent statement. He stole the show from all these eminent social scientists, and so people were saying that must be published, and that became part of the book. That was really the justification for the third edition. But it's sold, it's never been out of print.
Mm-hmm. What did you do, Al, when it came time to get out? Did you get out?
No, I'm still there. I've been born in North End, and I'm still living there.
All right. How about you, Ralph?
World War II changed my life. But when you raised the question, was this ever, you asked Bill, has this been applied, some of the things that he has done? I don't know whether this leads to that, but
exactly.
Could I explain?
That's fine. What did you
well,
do
it served me well. I call it, I call it Whyte's sociological insurance policy. What I did, when I learned about identifying the natural leader in this structure business, I applied it in the military service, and I applied it in civilian life as superintendent of public works in Burlington, and it did me well because I was able to identify people that were not not just to supervise, but the guy down below that might be the natural leader, and promoted him and put him in the right slot in spite of civil service.
The real shaker is what you're saying. You learn to study groups to see who the real power was, and then to adjust accordingly. Did you ever feel like you had run out on your people?
I regret that I'm not there every day. I love it so much, and I'd like to go back to Marion here, because I want you to know that I know I speak for Al. We loved the North End. And that's why I got him. That's why I guess this is happening today, because we loved the North End.
Well, Ralph, you moved out because you were in the service, and you
sure.
were in the Marine Corps and then in the Air Force and that's when you settled in Burlington.
Well, I might point out I'm a veteran of World War II, Korean conflict, and Vietnam. So, you know, I wasn't down the North End during that period.
No, I understand.
Especially when we were in combat.
I guess what I was driving at was the idea that that was home, and the deep roots were there. And I know of other sections of the city where when people move away from them, there's a sense of guilt that they carry with them.
Well, you know, I could like to give you some more on that. I ended up doing the World War II with the Marines. I ended up in the Naval Hospital after the combat setup. And when my wife, the book had been published, the first edition had been published, and I had told Bill, you know, I wanted, you know, after all, I did make a little contribution, and my gang was in there. And I will never forget it. I needed something to help me physically and mentally at the time in the hospital. And Rose sends me the book. And that brought the North End to I was in San Diego, brought it right to San Diego, and that did a lot to help me. Because then when I saw that for the first time there was some recognition, this is something that I mentioned to Bill, I was hurting for you know, hanging around the corner doing nothing, and I always knew that I had an inferiority complex, but I didn't feel inferior inside. But, you know, what do you do? How do you get out of there? How do you accomplish something? And this is how it all came about.
You mentioned, Professor Whyte, that all the role models there, school teachers, police captains, anybody with any authority was of another ethnic background, another nationality. And we'll get into what effect that can have on people in their growth right after this. Welcome back to Weekday. We are talking with and about the authors and a couple of the principles of Street Corner Society, which 40 years ago opened a lot of people's eyes to what really went on in a lower socioeconomic area of a major urban city. Gentlemen, the settlement house played a critical role in the Americanizing of group after group after group. Could you give us a couple sentences on that, Professor Whyte?
Well, the social workers mainly were oriented toward somehow lifting people out of their cultural, social background and promoting social mobility, ambition, and so on.
Making them more like English Americans.
Americanizing them. There were no social workers in the district that I knew of at the time who spoke Italian. That wasn't part of the job description.
Wait a minute. They came in to help the people become Americanized, and by not speaking Italian seemed to be looking down on your own language, didn't they, Ralph?
Mm-hmm. That's why Bill learned to speak Italian. One of the first things he did. He could converse with my mother as though he came from Avellino.
Was he the first outsider you ever knew who cared enough to learn Italian?
I would say yes. In fact, there was no reservation.
That must be quite a shock. Al, what did you think of guys like Bill Whyte? What did you think of the settlement house, the ladies and the men who came in there to improve you?
Well, I tell you, as I said before, I was born in there, and I still live there, I says, and I actually mingled in with all different kind of Italians, as you call them, Sicilians, Neapolitans, and whatever, Genoese. And I mixed in with all of them, and I got along marvelous with all of them. No matter which corner I went to, I was always recognized down the North End. See, I had a name for myself because I had a pool room at one time, and then I won a championship softball team in 1945. Then I got a charter club, and I got involved in politics, and I had quite a following out there. And I found it very interesting. That's the reason why I'm still there now.
Let me add on the settlement house, not to give too much one-sided a picture, because as we point out, there were differences between the two in the area, the North Bennett Street Industrial School and the North End Union. There was Frank Havey at the North End Union, who was very much involved in the development of the softball league, where Ralph played a major role. that was more related to the fellows on the corner. There was less of a social gulf there.
Okay, but it was Doc, Ernie Pecci's remark that closed the conclusions to your book that stayed with me, and I'd like to share it with our audience now. You don't know what it feels like to grow up in a district like this. You go to the first grade, Miss O'Rourke; second grade, Miss Casey; third grade, Miss Chalmers; fourth grade, Miss Mooney, and so on. At the fire station, it's the same. None of them are Italians. The police lieutenant is an Italian, and there are a couple of Italian sergeants, but they never have made an Italian captain in Cornerville, which was the name you used for the North End. In the settlement houses, none of the people in authority are Italian. Bill, those settlement houses were necessary at first. When our parents landed here, they didn't know where to go or what to do. They needed the social workers for intermediaries. They did a fine job then, but now the second generation is growing up, and we're beginning to sprout wings. They should take off that net and let us fly. 1938, that was Ernest Doc Pecci, and it took a world war to open up the economic end of it. I mean, for you, big deal, right, Ralph? It was right into the Marines. That was not such a fine economic life. But it's true, there was zero unemployment, and that's when people in Cornerville, the North End, and other street corners came off of the street corners and into the factories and service, right?
And that's how they got their jobs, because then they were eligible for civil service and that kind. They slipped in post office, police, and so forth.
Yeah, and it's a shame that it takes a war to break up that kind of bind. We're in a similar bind now in a lot of different ways. We have a declining economy and a lot of groups. Has the book, Ralph, given you understanding of other subgroups?
So much that I'm doing some writing myself, and this is kind of the heart of the study, especially in going back to Marion again, is the importance of the attributes of living in a close-knit community, this extended family business which we've lost today, that having aunts, uncles, grandfathers, and all that thing is so important to the welfare of a person or individual growing up. And I would say, relative to youthful criminality, the breaking up of homes and not living, and this extended business thing is...
Did you know how poor you were?
Definitely. I would agonize not because I was poor, because I knew there was something on the other side of the fence.
Mm-hmm. How about the way you look at other groups now? Say the blacks. There was a study done in Washington, D.C. called Tully's Corner. Does this, having come through what you came through, Ralph, does this give you an understanding of what other groups are going through?
It sure does.
What would you say about that?
About Tully's Corner?
Yeah, about other corners. You know, one of the things that I found in 20 years as a journalist and broadcaster is it's so easy to say they are. You know, those people, that bunch. You know what I'm talking about, ladies?
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, you come from South Boston. You were just telling me during the break, hey, when people say Southeast this and Southeast that, it makes me mad. Okay, but that's an American tendency, they or this or that. What kind of a message does Street Corner Society give to all of us about trying to understand that? Ralph?
Well, the message is that it's so important that we learn to understand other ethnic groups, or whether it be race, at the race level, ethnic level, that we should have a better understanding that everybody has something to offer. And the more we understand, the better we can have the interactions that would go on between one ethnic group and another. We'd have a better way of life in this country if we understood some of our problems, some of our needs, and some of our customs and traditions.
Professor Whyte, do you see that coming?
I'd like to see that coming. I think we have to approach it from the standpoint of organization. I don't know black neighborhoods, but Elliot Lebo, who did the Tully's Corner study, found similar sorts of organizational life, and he found the basic problem there, as we found earlier in the North End, was that there were no jobs except dead-end jobs for the people that were in Tully's Corner. The ladder up, there were it was just one rung, and that was it. Just part-time jobs or jobs that led nowhere. So that's, I'm afraid, the bind we're in now.
When you went back and looked at Doc after a short break, you found that he had risen to a certain level and then begun to fall back because he didn't have work. Maybe it wasn't Doc, maybe it was somebody else that you were describing in the book. But you noted that Having lost his job, he began to drift back, and he knew he was drifting back.
Well, he had this psychological problem that as a leader, he had the men on the corner depending on him. But when he was unemployed and had no money to spend, I mean, nobody was a big spender on the corner, but if the fellows wanted to go somewhere or go to a movie or even go out for coffee and he didn't have money, he didn't want to depend on the others who were depending upon him. And so he would get these psychological problems, dizzy spells, and yet when Frank Habey at the North End Union put him in charge of a recreation center, well, he snapped out of it right away. He had a job and a place, and he identified Ralph right away, and they were running that recreation center very smoothly, whereas the two trained social workers in other centers couldn't hack it. They were closed down in a couple of weeks.
Stole the plumbing, too. That's right, broke windows where we had actually put on vaudeville show, boxing matches, ping pong tournaments, and that kind of thing.
You had to get your kids to knock off stealing things to bring into the center.
That's right, and Bill points that out in the book. I had to stop them from bringing things in.
I want to thank all three of you. If there's a message that rings loud and clear to me, not only Street Corner Society, which continues to be the seminal understanding of what goes on in so-called tough areas, it's that it's jobs and it's an opportunity to grow that really make the difference, and not having somebody stand on the outside and say, well, over here is a slum. Thanks, Al Natale. Thank you, Ralph Orlandelo, Professor William Foote Whyte. The book is Street Corner Society. It's 43 years old, but it's as current now as it was when it was written, and it has something to offer for all of us.